how we integrate digital into our interpretation of historic interiors. Historic Royal Palaces, you may know already, we're the charity that manages the Tower of London, Hampton Court Palace, Kensington Palace, Kew Palace and Pagoda, which is fun, the Banqueting House at Whitehall and Hillsborough Castle and Gardens in Northern Ireland. We don't receive any government money or grants, so we're dependent on our visitors for our income. I'm going to talk a bit about why you won't see screens at any of our sites generally once you get out of the ticket office, about how we use technology but we're continually trying to hide it, and I'll talk about a couple of case studies as well. So first of all, just how we think about interpretation. The way we think about interpretation is that it provides our palaces with a coherent narrative environment in which stories can unfold. So at its most basic level, that might be putting a sign up and telling visitors the stories from history. But actually what we're really interested in doing is how we can design and create a 3D environment that allows visitors to experience the story, not simply to be told it. Interpretation for us is where curatorial research and audience research meet. So you can't have interpretation with just historic research. And understanding our audiences is absolutely critical. So the curatorial research uncovers the story, and the audience research identifies the need, knowledge and opportunity. And what we're trying to do is create an experience that enables audiences to connect with the stories. And so that's both intellectually. So yes, we're interested in learning objectives. So we're interested in what they come away having learned, but also about emotional connection. And at its best, interpretation can bring the past to life. Thinking about our audiences, we use an audience segmentation model devised by Maurice Hargreaves McIntyre. Some of you in the cultural sector are probably familiar with that and use it. That allows us to understand motivations and not just demographics. We find it's pretty unhelpful knowing whether somebody is 60 and from the US or 55 and from France in terms of how they're going to actually engage with history and our sites. But what we found from talking to our visitors is that the majority, when they come to our sites, what they want is to step back in time, to suspend reality in the present day, and to have a primarily emotional connection with the past and with spaces. That's a real challenge with digital, because nothing says 21st century like a digital intervention in a 16th century space. And so if our primary invitation to visitors is to step back in time, is digital actually useful to us in any way whatsoever? Obviously, given the current audience, I am going to say yes. Just a quick word about authenticity. We did a major research report a few years ago looking at what our visitors mean by authenticity. So it's something you hear curators talk about, usually in terms of the materiality of an object or of a historic space. What we found talking to our visitors is that authenticity is felt. So a space will feel authentic to them. So the original features are really important, but also it's about that emotional connection. And so digital actually really can help us with that. It can help with that bringing to life, with that making those connections across time, rather than detracting from an authentic experience. It's not just all about that brick having been made in the 16th century. One of our most important principles is history where it happened. We create experiences that are site specific. So it's about standing in a space where Henry VIII did something or felt something, or where Anne Boleyn did or felt something. Anyone can do Henry VIII. Hampton Court's the only place who can do Henry VIII at Hampton Court. So if we can use digital to help bring those moments to life, that can be really powerful for our audiences. It can also help with this sort of multi-layering of experiences. Our visitors come to us with different learning styles. They want to read, they want to listen, they want to actively engage. They're different ages, they have different existing knowledge. They might be a first-time visitor or a repeat visitor. We can't have a one-size-fits-all approach for them. And so we're constantly looking at how we can layer the story in graphics, through recreated elements. You can see here people playing the game of court, which if you're really unlucky, you get executed as a Jacobite spy, which always seems to happen to me when I play it with my kids. It's nothing to do with my nationality. Or you might want to listen to an audio guide. We have a lot of live interpreters as well. So we have a historic kitchens team who are actually in the kitchens and cooking. And so there's all opportunities to engage with human beings if you want to engage with human beings, but also with graphics and more traditional interpretation methods. We want to be multi-sensory as well. So we have a very large international audience, particularly at the Tower and Kensington Palace, 50% of whom may have English as a second language. So screeds and screeds of text is not going to work for them unless we can translate it into 10 languages, which then, you're taking up the whole wall. So thinking about how we can communicate without words is really important to us. At the Bloody Tower here, we wanted to get across the story that Sir Walter Raleigh, when he was imprisoned at the Tower, grew the herbs to make his famous elixir. We could have made a sign, but we'd have had to translate it into 10 languages, or we could plant a garden that you can actually touch and smell and engage with physically. Equally in the kitchens, we could tell you that these were kitchens, or we could recreate the food and allow you to turn the spit and smell the meat on the fire, which does get given to staff at the end of the day. Big part of the job. And so looking at some case studies, I'm going to start with the Bloody Tower at the Tower. It's a really popular space. It's got a great name. It sounds like it's going to be really, frightening and exciting, but it's actually really small. And on a busy day, we're trying to get 15,000 visitors through the Tower. It's a really small site, tiny, narrow spiral staircases. So we have the real challenge of having 1,000 years of history, and we're really interested in all of it, but having to communicate it quickly enough that we don't cause horrific bottlenecks. And you might be asking why I'm banging on about kitchens and replica food and gardens when actually this is a conference about digital. But actually it's about mixing all of those things. And so at the Bloody Tower, what we did was this is good. It's a pointer.
Yeah.
So we planted the garden. So when visitors are queuing, they queue up and they go through the garden. They experience Walter Raleigh's garden, and then they go into his room. Now in his room we have recreated historic furniture. The curators have spent ages geeking out over what individual details look like on all the chairs and the lighting scheme. But actually, when it comes to telling the story in there, it's digital that we've used, and so that's how we're communicating the story through atmospheric digital. So there is light and there's sound, but also through very visual means. We can't. As I said before, use lots of words, but we can use lots of pictures. We're really very keen on projection mapping as well, because it allows us to introduce story, but then to switch it off again. It's completely ephemeral. We're not intervening in the historic building fabric, so we can project a story across the room, and then it's gone. It's atmospheric, it's reversible, and it's short. We can also change it. We can have two-state design. So when it's a really busy day, we can have the very quick sausage factory version. And when it's a wet day in February on a Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock, you can have a longer version. So digital gives us this flexibility in a really congested site that traditional means of interpretation can't. Looking at Henry VIII's kitchen at Hampton Court, which is a subject very close to my heart. My office is right next door as well. Here, what we wanted to do primarily, we have this amazing team of historic cooks who've spent the last 30 odd years working in the kitchens with old recipes and replicas of the tools that we use and recreating them. Some of them are great, some of them are disgusting. And creating an environment for historic cookery was one of our primary motivations here. And so when you go into the kitchens, you'll see there is furniture that we've recreated. We've spent ages trying to work out how to recreate the lamps from the 16th century, using examples from the Mary Rose and visual references, recreating carts with traditional wheelwrights, and making really disgusting feeling replica meats, which when you touch it makes we work with probably about 40 different suppliers in this, so there's no exhibition designer, there's no CAD package of drawings. It's a very organic process, and lots of craftsmen. So here's Les the Cooper, who makes our barrel. So it's a profoundly analogue creation experience. A lot of this, but actually, what do we do when the cooks go home? People are expensive, really expensive, to have in the kitchens all day, every day. High days and holidays, yes, but on that Wednesday in February, having a team of 4 cooks in there is just not economically feasible for a charity. And so we thought really hard about how we can bring the cooks into the kitchen when they're not actually physically there. So you can see behind Robin here, as he's leaving the kitchen, these cauldrons. And those cauldrons actually bubble. So they don't just make the noise of bubbling. When you touch them, they feel like they're bubbling. You can feel the vibrations. And we've tried to introduce that throughout the kitchens. So our practice is not just about looking backwards, it's about using digital to bring these things to life. It's fully integrated, so there's no screens here. So these chopping boards look like chopping boards until you go and touch them. There's no sign telling you to touch them. Our aim is to reward exploration and to encourage visitors to explore and to touch. Generally what we find is that it's the kids that find them first. If you get a big group of sort of more grown-up visitors, they sort of step back and they don't touch it, and then a kid will run forward and touch it, and then they're all playing. The technology is really hidden, so there's a projector up here that projects down onto the chopping board. The other great advantage of that, and the reason our maintenance team really like us, is that when it breaks, you can't tell. So there's never any need to go and put a laminated sign on it saying this screen is broken, because actually it's just a chopping board. It's just a chopping board that doesn't come to life anymore. Not that it breaks very often, it's really reliable tech. But the way that we developed this, we're very lucky to have an R&D studio at Historic Royal Palaces, and it's a place in the palace, but actually it's also a way of working and a way of thinking about how we test and learn. It's an opportunity for us to try things and try them small, and to, if necessary, fail small and fail fast. But sometimes the nugget of something amazing comes out of it and turns into a whole new experience. With the kitchens, we invited Chompo and Rosier in for a 2-week residency when we first started thinking about kitchens. So quite a long time before we started, making pottery or working with wheelwrights, and a long time before we were going to actually start implementing the project. And the research question for that residency was, how can visitors trigger real sensations with real actions? So, no flaps, no buttons, but actually, if you're in a kitchen, what is the natural thing that you would do with the objects that should be in a kitchen, and to create the right interaction from that? It might not have worked. So we were very open to that at the start, that we might spend 2 weeks working on this and it's just a bit rubbish. But we were really lucky that it did. Not all of it though. So the vibration worked really well. Directional sound worked really well. The chopping boards worked really well. We were really keen to try heat. But as you can imagine, in a palace that has had its history of burning a bit in the past, we just couldn't get that to work with our health and safety team. We couldn't get to that moment of comfort where you could touch a pot and it could be warm, but we could guarantee we weren't going to accidentally burn the palace down at some point. So we tried lots of things, but you can see here it was very workbenchy. It looked messy. We invited visitors in to have a go at it. But it wasn't finished. But we ended up going from the R&D studio to the film studio with the successful elements of it. The result is it's the cookery team that you actually see in the kitchens on a cooking day are the ones whose hands you see on the chopping board. It's the ones whose hands you see that we have a big boiling pot with really long sequences. So it rewards exploration. It's not just like a short 10-second film. If you spend long enough touching that chopping board, they'll carry on chopping and making that meal for a long, long time. The same with in the boiling house, we have a big pot of meat. As you go close to it, you see a ladle come in, and then something else will happen, and something else will happen. So the longer you spend, the more of the process you see. The beauty, and as I said before, the beauty of the approach is when it breaks, it's still just a chopping board. But it's been really successful with visitors. And the one question that we've continually, I think, asked ourselves is, should we tell them it's there? And so it's something that we're always discussing with the front of house team, because they really love it, and they get disappointed if visitors miss it. So if they miss the chopping board, if they don't explore and they don't see it. So every night, every 6 months or so, we circle back to it and go, oh, should we put a sign up? No, we're not going to put a sign up. But I think it's a sort of a measure of the fact that we're still thinking about it. We're still thinking about iterating it and changing it and how we could improve it. Moving on to another case study. This is Victoria, a royal childhood at Kensington. Again, this is another project that it's not a digital project at all. This is a project that is about recreating Victoria's rooms that she grew up in at Kensington. She was born there, and famously went to sleep a princess, woke up a queen in 1837 in the bedroom at Kensington. Here again, we started with audience research, and what visitors told us more than anything was that they wanted to feel like they were in her actual rooms, to see her things, to experience her childhood. And that resulted in us spending a lot of time in the archives researching wallpaper, doing paint scrapes, seeing what colour the skirting boards should have been, spending a long time looking at carpet patterns, and they can really play havoc with your eyes at that period. Worrying about gilding schemes and integrating, and you can see here, sort of integrating graphics and thinking how a sign can not be a sign but can be appropriate within a historic space. But we also wanted to be playful. This is a child's story. It's a story of a child growing up at Kensington, and it's a story for children. Now, there are traditional ways of doing that with dressing up. That goes down really well. But we wondered whether there was something else we could do to animate it further. So we asked our audiences. We had an idea of various different approaches. I don't know if anybody's seen, it was an amazing YouTube video of the Rijksmuseum. They have a ship which is animated with little Pepper's ghost people in it. So we showed them that, and we said, what about this? And we showed them various other means that we might use to animate the spaces. And the feedback came really strongly that they felt it should feel Victorian. So they didn't mind if it was digital, but they wanted it to look mechanical. And so that was our sort of starting principle. So you can see here we have that button. So we have a toy theatre here in the theatre room, which is something from Victoria's childhood. It plays her favourite opera, I Puritani. It has these little characters that sort of slide in and out, and the music plays. It looks profoundly analogue, but actually it's really digital. So you open up the back of it and it's full of circuitry, it's full of show control. It's a really complex sound design that sits behind it. But for the visitors sitting there, it's Victoria's toy theatre that looks right for the period, and it comes to life. We also have what we call our coronation in a cupboard. Again, something where we spent a lot of time thinking about how the cabinetry should be designed, how the scenery inside is painted in a way that feels right for 1837. But as you approach it, it starts to play Zadok the priest, and the light comes through the window in Westminster Abbey. Again, something that doesn't appear to be digital, but actually really is. And then finally, here in the ballroom, we have candelabras with dancers whirling around on top of them, including Victoria in the middle, because this is when she first meets Albert. It's a very romantic moment in her life. Again, something that looks very mechanical, but of course has really complex show control sitting behind it. So for our visitors, they're prepared to accept those digital elements within a historic space, but so long as we are thinking about how they are appropriate for the space. Another thing, again, which looks very analogue, is our miniature worlds. So we always struggle to people spaces. That's the hard thing with a heritage site, because everybody's left. And so they can feel a bit dead and empty. So how do you get the humanity back into them? And with our Victoria project, our conceit was that we start with a doll's house, and all of the little people, the characters from her life within it, have escaped, and you see them around the rooms, and they'll be sitting on furniture or playing with a quill or doing quite quirky and fun things. Obviously, it's a very Victorian conceit. They're very old-fashioned looking little figures, but created in a profoundly 21st century way. So we started with sculpture with clay. in the old-fashioned way, making our Victoria and making our Conroy and making our Duchess of Kent. But then they're scanned and into really quite cutting-edge 3D modelling software. We couldn't possibly afford to model all of those little figures individually in clay. We'd have bankrupted ourselves in week one. But what we can do is we can make one Victoria, and then we can make her dance, we can make her ice skate, we can make her climb trees, we can make her ride a donkey by manipulating her in here. Slightly bizarrely, we had to do the modelling for each of those poses ourselves because they need a human actually going like that and pretending to skate in order to make that work. And then we end up with all of our little Victorias and things around the route. So again, something that looks very analogue, but actually it's pretty techy. And then where we are using tech again, we're sort of integrating it into the route. So we start with this, the doll's house, but as you get close to it, there's sound embedded in it and light. So the little rooms come to life and you hear Dash, her dog, barking, but you hear his bark moving between the different rooms. Here was her family tree, which lights up and shows her progress to the throne because she was never meant to be queen. Shows how she got there, basically all her uncles dying with no children. But rather than having a button that you press to light up the family tree, you actually touch a book, and touching the book makes the family tree light up. Not everybody figures that out, most of the kids do. But again, it's another interaction that it rewards exploration. It's not telling you what to do. So finally, I just wanted to talk about our digital visitor guide. So we're not completely anti-screen. We appreciate that actually sometimes screens can be really useful. A couple of years ago, we implemented it's not an audio guide, it's a digital visitor guide that comes on it's a phone in a very hard case, which means when you chuck it on the cobbles, it doesn't break. Oh, there we go, you can see it with our Chief Yeoman Warder there. We know that audio guides are actually really popular at our sites. People ask for them. Also with our massive international audience, it's really important to be able to talk to them in their own languages. So Russian speakers want interpretation in Russian. It's very difficult for us to integrate that throughout the design. We also know that many visitors like to listen, and actually they want to listen to our curators. They want to hear that direct first-person voice of authority. So that's something that we can offer on the digital visitor guide. The other place that these are really useful is, I talked a bit at the start about our different audience segments and their different needs and expectations. And we have some audiences who come, most of them, as I said, come because they want to step back in time, because they want to feel like they're in the space where history happened. We have others who really want to know how we research the wallpaper. Why to paint that colour, and catering for those two audiences in one sometimes very small space is really difficult, because in order to satisfy the ones who want to know how you research the wallpaper, you've got to break the spell for the ones who don't want that. And so the digital visitor guide is incredibly useful to us in addressing those different audience needs, and we can be really flexible in the types of tour we offer on as well, family tours as well. It's handheld and comes on a big lanyard. It's not an off-the-shelf one, so this is something that we actually developed in-house. So it has the hardware obviously is off the shelf, but we work with acoustic guide on the back end of it, but the front end of it, the software is something that is managed by our team, our content management team within HRP. And it means that we can quite responsibly change it, so it has the daily programme on it. We can change it if a route closes, if we've had to put scaffolding up somewhere, and it means we can also upload content on it quite quickly. It's mainly audio. We have a little bit of video on it, but what we've found through our audience research is actually people want to look at the spaces. They don't want to look at their screen. So we'll use video if it can add nuance, perhaps if we want people to be able to look at the back of a tapestry and see what the colours used to be. This is something that can be incredibly powerful in that way, but it's not the primary functionality of it. And we're really excited as well. Very soon we're going to be launching this at Kensington, and our new devices are going to have augmented reality functionality, which is really fun. And so we're launching initially just with image recognition, which means that if you're standing in front of a painting, you can hold it up and it will start delivering content about that painting. Not all of them yet, because it's going to take us a while. But over time, we hope to be able to add other functionality to it. One of the bits that I'm really excited about is we can create little portals. So if you're pointing at a room, you can see a door or a portal, and as you physically step forward through that, it will take you back in time on your screen. So you go from looking at 2020 Queen State apartments to the Queen State apartments that we've managed to digitally recreate in 1700, for instance. So there's some really exciting functionality coming on that. And then I think just finally to say, have you got any questions or anything we'd like to discuss?